Our last talk was in July. So we're starting off the 2023 to 24 year season of Greenwich Industrial History Talks with Mary Mills, who is going to talk about our local shipbuilder. There was shipbuilding in
William Joyce.
And so thank you, Mary. Mary's our co-chair and is a hugely well-resourced local historian. So welcome to Mary. And please, let's go ahead. This is being recorded, so please mute yourselves if you're, because otherwise we hear your cough and we briefly see you on the screen, and that's it. So please mute if you're not talking. So it should be just me, and I'm going to mute myself. We will eventually, when I've managed to get round to it, be on our YouTube channel. Anyway, Mary, go ahead. Thank you very much.
Hope this is right.
Yeah, Mary started screen sharing. There you are.
Well, I hope it's right.
Then you go click from beginning.
This should be from beginning, but it doesn't seem to want to go. That's it. Yeah. This is about William Joyce, an engineer and shipbuilder. And as I said in the plug for this, he's the only shipbuilder building proper ships in what we would regard as proper Greenwich. So before we get any further, one of the most interesting things about William is his father, now the expert on Jeremiah Joyce, is sitting in the audience, which is John Issett, who wrote a very good book about Jeremiah Joyce. William was only 2 when his father died, so it's going to be quite difficult for me to say that he was an influence on him. But he's such an interesting man. Just very briefly, there's one slide. This young man, very, very bright, from a relatively humble background, trained at Dissenters Academy in Hackney, becomes PA essentially to Earl Stanhope, aristocracy, lives at Chevening, close government contracts, very left wing, one of the radical aristocrats of that period. Jeremiah gets himself into some trouble, which is quite well documented. A lot of history of the period and history ends up in the Tower of London, but is never charged and comes out.
Dead.
But then he takes on a second career. We read all these books, people like me do, books about 19th century, late 18th century technology, and they're under various people's names. Rees is the famous one. But they're all actually written by Jeremiah, who ghosted them for all these people. So we're starting off with a father who I'm sure William can never even remember. And going through, looking quickly at Jeremiah Joyce's family, I wanted to pick particularly out his eldest son, Charles, the second child on this list. He's 15 years older than his brother, William, and he has probably the biggest influence on William's life. Quickly going over to Charles's background. He seems to have gone to work in Egypt, working for a city cotton broker, as a young man. Now look at all the places where his children are born. Egypt, London, Egypt, Trieste, Worthing, Egypt, Tunbridge. And he's going around living for a while in all these places, has a lot of really very, very good contacts. He becomes very well off. He has his own office in the city. It says, keeps saying he's bankrupt for these people. They go bankrupt all the time and stop being bankrupt. And he lived in a number of upmarket places, ends up living at Tunbridge Castle. That's not the ruined bit, it's a big house around the back with a sizable staff, and from where he sends baskets of fruit to the Queen. So he's clearly light years away from his father by the time he's middle-aged and very wealthy. And I've every reason to believe, and I'll come to some of this in a minute, that he's the finance behind William, except that I sort of vaguely think that Stanhope might have provided a bit as well. The final thing about him, he died on a metropolitan train, and they took him off at King's Cross, and subsequently regulations about corpses on railway stations were changed. I mean, we all have our moments of fame or something. Right, so William, as a young man, first things I come across him, he's living in what are clearly lodgings with various other young engineers. And he develops this thing called the pendulous engine. Now, when I've punted this around various chums who know about steam engines, they're not actually very sort of complimentary, relatively unremarkable. I don't think he invented the idea. I will tell anybody who asks me later who that's a quotation from. But it did seem to sell well. And throughout this story of William as an engineer and shipbuilder, I know that the pendulous engine was selling and selling internationally. And that it maybe was one of the things that underwrote the engineering part of the business. Now, in the Kent County Archive is this little advertisement leaflet dated 1835 when William's still a very, very young man, advertising this engine, new and improved. And he's trying to sell it to a brewer in Margate, which is where they've picked this advert up from. Gives his address as 67 Guildford Street. Now, 67 Guildford Street is the home of John Ferry. Now, Ferry, as anybody who researches steam engine technology knows, wrote this treatise on the steam engine, and the first place most researchers would go to for information about steam in this period, but also a whole lot of other related technical books. And that he was running his home really as a sort of a base for various bits of technical education. It also turns out that Ferry, as a teenager, had begun his career as a draftsman, and that a lot of the illustrations in the books which Jeremiah Joyce was ghosting and editing have got Ferry's work in them as the illustration. And again, it isn't too big a jump to think that perhaps he took his old boss's young son in, give him a start in life, been left without a father when he was only 2, and now they do what they can for him. So he's got finance and technical backing. And just very briefly, I know his engines are selling all over the place, but here's 2 sold in Greenwich. One of them is to John Bennett Laws at his revolutionary and very, very important bone mill and superphosphate factory at Deptford. Why he has to advertise it on an ashtray, I don't know, but it's a not unquirky illustration. And that is, he's there on mid-century, really. The other is Frank Hill's Chemical Works, also in Deptford, but the engine, the Joyce engine, is at East Greenwich. And when Frank died in the 1890s, and the inventory of what he had, what was being sold in the works to Southeast Electricity was a pair of vertical inverted oscillating steam engines by Joyce of Greenwich. And that would have been there in the tide mill when it was being used as a corn mill from presumably like the 1850s. It's 1842 that Frank took the tide mill over. So there we are. Now, in 1841, William marries. Now, this is another story. Now, this is almost the end of the scandals. He marries somebody called Louisa Edgecombe. And on the banns of the wedding, she gives her address as Compton Street. Now, if we look at Compton Street, there is a Louisa Edgecombe living there, but she's a married woman. Edgecombe's her married name, and she's got 2 small children. Strange. Any other Louisa Edgecombes? Well, John Ferry has a housemaid called Louisa Edgecombe. Now, that's much more likely. And she comes from Salisbury, and she's a certain age. But, you know, I can't find any Edgecombes in Salisbury. But it's a tip-off on the Mormon database. Somebody had been looking at Salisbury rather more carefully and realised that she and her family are actually Hedgecombe, Louise Hedgecombe from Fisherton Anger. Now, Fisherton Anger is the really, really rough bit of Salisbury in the 19th century. So she's come to London and changed her name to get a job in a respectable West End household. Who can blame her for that? I mean, also, each official document that comes along in the censuses and everything over the years, she seems to lose 2 years every time. So she's actually getting technically younger as she gets older. And I mean, who can blame her for that either? So there she is, Louisa Edgecombe from Salisbury. And they move into this very nice house in Greenwich in Diamond Terrace. I think for those of you who don't know Diamond Terrace, it's a very nice little street which doesn't actually feed out into a road. You have to go up alleyways and things to get into the street. You can just a bit get cars in from one end, and it's a turning of Hyde Vale. One of the houses in the road has a sand mine in the garden. So it's in sort of the Maidstone Hill mining and quarrying area. But it's a very nice house. It was brand new when William and Louisa moved into it. We think, me and Neil Ryan, think that it was probably some sort of leasehold arrangement. He didn't actually buy it. But that is a nice house for a young couple, I think. More than I could afford when I was a young couple. Or now. Right, and he also gets a foundry. And this is as it says on the bottom here, Greenwich's old gasworks. It's in Norway Street. Norway Street, and I'll show you a map in a minute, but people who live in Greenwich will know Norway Street very well. Went down to Norway Wharf in these days. This is the original gasworks built by Gosling and only really operational for about 2 years in the 1820s. And you'll have to read my great work on early Greenwich gas to find out about it. Very decent little works. It had a gas holder around the back somewhere. What I can't explain from this picture is what St Alfred's steeple is doing there in the wrong direction, because where that's sited is probably the Trafalgar Road roundabout where the baths are. But anyway, this becomes Joyce's foundry and ironworks, and it has plate making, a model department, and a chimney, and various other things. And it remains in their ownership, the ownership of the company, until it closes down. It's now the site of the council estate, it's one of the 30th estates, the Eastney Street estate. Now, this is one of the many, I think, installations which Joyce put in to mills and so on all around the Near East. And I can only assume that it was put in through his brother's influence. There's a lot about this. This is just one illustration from a very large pack of illustrations, descriptions of this mill. It's in Smyrna. Now, Smyrna doesn't really exist anymore, and I can't remember what the wretched place is called now. I spent a lot of time with Google Earth going around it, but there was a lot of problems, and I think this mill has gone, although there was there is a mill, I would think, of similar date, which was converted into offices about 4 or 5 years ago. It's an impressive building, and it would have been, I would have thought, very valuable, and that they would have made a lot of money out of the whole series of engines which are in it, because I think they didn't just provide the steam engines. I mean, they would have, some of the milling equipment and so on will have been made by Joyce, all in Greenwich. But disaster strikes. One of the things with Joyce is that he has a whole series of misfortunes, which are not his fault. This isn't his fault. This is a boat called the Cricket, which was moored at Delphi Pier in 1847 and suddenly blew up. And lots of people who were on the boat waiting for it to leave, people on the shore and everything, were killed. A lot of them were blown into the river and never seen again. Unknown number were vanished. I mean, a lot of casualties were impossible to count. Now, there was a long inquiry into all this, and there's lots of information about it for anybody who's interested. The whole of the engine and boiler and everything had been supplied by Joyce. He gave evidence to the inquiry along with his foreman, with Thomas Meacham, and a lot about Thomas Meacham in a minute. But it turned out that what had happened was that the boatman, the man who was in charge of the boat and working the engine, turned down the safety valve, tied it down, and went to lunch, which has been site of many an accident. I think the only other big accident I really involved, it was much the same. Somebody tied down the safety valve and went for lunch. So, but a lot of this obviously leads to questions about Joyce, because it's his engines, and there's lots of questions in the inquiry about the quality of the steel used and stuff like this. But it is, it isn't really isn't his fault. Now, I've just put here some of the sites he was into. So that's Norway Street there. It's where the creek comes down, creek. Greenwich Waitrose on the Phoenix Gasworks site there. This is all walkways and pathways and Dowell's Walk and Dreadnought Walk. And the council estate is there, and I think everybody would know it well. And the foundry is there, that's the foundry. Obviously here is all new flats. And then we go down here. The first wharf he uses is a tiny little wharf here called Bishop's Wharf. Now, it's so small, I've never seen it written on a map as that being the title of it. But I knew somebody who worked for Pope and Bond when they were down here, and he knew all the history of it and said that was Bishop's Wharf, and that Joyce used that for a while and kept a slip on it and continued to use the slip after he took in Iron the shipbuilding site, which is the whole of Dreadnought Wharf, which is very much, well, it's got offices all over it now and a pub and other things, and here's a picture of what that riverside looks like now. But I think lots of us can remember when that was various wharves and, with the shipping businesses on several of them. It was used for many years by Tilbury, Lighthouse, and Pope and Bond were at one end. So there we are, that's Joyce, and this is proper Greenwich. As I think from over here in Deptford Creek, where all the important shipbuilding is over here. And he's here. The site was taken over, the Dreadnought, taken over by Rennie's, but I don't think Rennie built anything of any great size there. And it was all I shouldn't say lifeboats, but small stuff. Right, so the first thing he builds is the city of Paris. And as I put a warning up here, there's lots of ships called City of Paris in this period. And there's a great big lots of editor in the papers, first seagoing steamship built in Greenwich. It's built for the Commercial Steam Packet Company. said to be for their London to Boulogne run. And once it had been launched, it goes off to Milford Haven, to do the Waterford to Milford Irish Sea crossing for the Great Western Railway. And I just put in, it was built to designs of Oliver Lang, who at that time is master shipwright at Woolwich Dockyard, which is obviously an extremely prestigious person. And he has an enormous reputation. City of Paris. And there's lots of quite charming stories about the City of Paris. She was only on the Milford Waterford run for about 15 years. But there's numbers of stories in the Waterford local history papers about her and all sorts of little things, picking out people from a wreck and all various this and that's it. One story I've been highlighting about her is when Great Eastern came to Milford Haven in 1860, City of Paris escorted her up the channel to the actual docks. There were every ship in Milford Haven and on the Milford approaches with immense numbers of spectators cheering Great Eastern as she came in. And, that shows us something about Great Eastern, quite honestly. I mean, the way that she was treated and is derided a lot of the time. Well, they're not as a cable ship, of course. And, the way she was just broken up. But, that her arriving at Milford Haven that day is a big event. And City of Paris is very honoured to be her escort vessel. Now, she was sold from Waterford in 1864. And the National Maritime Museum website says that she was converted to a screw steamer in Renfrew. Now, I'm sure the National Maritime Museum will write about everything they do and say, and I would not want to argue with them, except that I can't trace the ship after 1864, which rather implies that her name was changed. I don't know to what, and I don't know what happened to her. Right. Meanwhile, inland, we continue with the pendulous steam engine and the Great Exhibition. Now, I realise here I'm sort of doing this in the wrong order, really, but in the Great Exhibition, when it had moved to Penge and Crystal Palace, the main building had an ice-making machine for the refreshment rooms, ices, which were run by a pendulous engine, and various others. So the thing about the pendulous engine, it's small and it's convenient. And you can put it in places like a refreshment room, and no one's going to get too upset. Then the catalogue of the Great Exhibition itself gives all of these weaving and spinning sites which have apparently using Joyce's pendulous engine and which are being demonstrated at the Great Exhibition. Now, all of these, except one, come from Bradford. I've not been able to trace any of them. But picking up an old catalogue of where steam engines were preserved, one of them, catalogue, said that Bradford Museum had a Joyce engine. Now, getting onto the Bradford Museum today, they think you're talking about goodness knows what. They've never heard of Joyce. They don't know about his pendulous engine. And asked about these various weaving companies, they don't know anything about them either. But I think there's possibly something in that, and that somebody thought in the Bradford Museum 50 years ago or so, I mean, what's this stupid thing? We get rid of it. And so it's probably just a snapshot of the number of these engines that Joyce was selling. And what do I, goodness me, the cat's trying to get out of the window. I got this email from America a couple of years ago about the Kent Ironworks and William Joyce. Kent Ironworks is actually wrong, never mind. And he's talking about this legal case, which I knew about, which Joyce is involved, but not directly. It's about carriage liability. And somebody has had a steam engine, one of Joyce's engines, which has gone wrong. And he sent a crankshaft back to Joyce to have some work done on it, and it doesn't arrive back with Joyce. And so it's who is liable for this missing crankshaft. It clearly isn't Joyce, because he's just sitting there waiting for it. But it's a big thing in America, and they call it a very famous case. I don't think it's a famous case in England, but in America, I've actually found children's legal booklets with little cartoon pictures about the famous Hadley Baxendale case with the Joyce engine. And this is not the first thing I've got to say about America and their interest in legal cases involving Joyce. It is really a big thing, this case, in American legal circles. Right, so we carry on back to Egypt, and where I'm sure Brother Charles got this contract for Joyce, William, for a steam yacht for the Pasha of Egypt. I must say that if you run Pasha of Egypt and steam yacht through the net, that most of the big London shipbuilding yards seem to be building much bigger vessels for other Pashas. Some of them had more than one. This is a steam yacht, a screw, interior in splendid Oriental style. I was unable to find a picture I had of one of the other yachts, which had a dinner party with a room which would have done quite well in one of the larger cruise liners, really. But anyway, again, it's about Charles' influence, and it's about building internationally. Now, he then built these 3 ships, and they're very confusingly. This is for Woods. Wood is a city politician, and they are basically importers of sherries and this sort of stuff. And they commission these 3 cargo vessels, all of them screws, and all of them also rigged as 3-masted schooners. Now, this is a very confusing saga, and I will explain why in a minute. Both 2 of them changed names throughout, and certainly there's lots of other vessels with these names, particularly Britannia. I mean, the sea must have been littered with Britannias going to and fro. So they built them. They used both the slip at Bishop's Wharf and the one at Dreadnought. But there was a lot of problems, and at least one of them sat on the slip for nearly a year untouched. Now, this involves this court case called Wood versus Bell, and it's about Joyce's contract with the Spanish and Portuguese screw steam shipping company, which is the Wood Company. And it's about the complex system of financing the ships and who owns the ships when they're under construction. Now, if you want to know about this, there is acres and acres and acres in American legal textbooks, blow by blow account of what everybody said in court, which every letter everybody wrote to everybody else. But the point we want to get to is that at some stage early on in the course, Joyce goes bankrupt. Now, I sort of think it was a genuine bankruptcy, because he was in a terrific mess with all these parcels of money being passed around. It effectively gets him out of court. He no longer becomes a party to this interminable case, and they can continue as they were. So here he is, here's the balance sheet, which is obviously very much cut down by me, of the money he owes and the money which is in dispute. But at the end, the bankruptcy commissioners' debts and liabilities are large, but the assets are also very considerable. And quite honestly, nothing happens. Well, they get busy building the ship, which wasn't being built, and off we go. Now, in the middle of all this, Phoenix Gas Company, which has owned the site of the foundry, decided to sell the freehold. They also, of course, have to sell it, inverted commas, for the bankruptcy. And it appears to be bought by Thomas Meacham, who is, of course, Joyce's foreman. And so they just seem to swap round. I mean, Joyce has been owner and manager, and Meacham has been foreman. He's now, Meacham is owner and foreman, and Joyce is manager. And I put this picture in because it's got roughly, you can see the Dreadnought itself masking where the Joyce site was. And is that Watkins steam tug and Wannach coming up the river? With any luck, nothing. No picture of this period is complete without Wannach. So back to shipbuilding. They build this thing called the Victor Emmanuel. It's financed by Joyce himself. It's an iron-hulled steamship with auxiliary engine driving, single screw. And within 2 years, it's converted to a sailing ship. Oh, no, go away. So what I wanted to say was, I've got very little documentary evidence for this, that Charles Joyce wanted to set up a shipping line himself between him and William, where William is supplying the ships. But these ships will have a screw, which will take them downriver, obviously, and out into the Atlantic, wherever it is they're going, into the wind, and then they'll put up sails, turn off the engine, and they'll be blown down to Africa, which is where they were hoping to go. And that seems, in some ways, to my uninitiated life, fairly sensible. I'm sorry, the cat's just switched the iPad on, it's okay. Yeah. Now, what happened to Victor Emmanuel? She's only been launched a couple of years when she goes aground off the Isle of Wight with a voyage coming from Alexandria, Egypt again, with cargo of beans, barley, wool, flax, and gum. And she broke up in 90 minutes. And the Coast Guard didn't see the flares going off. I must say that the only other wreck on that coast which I've ever really investigated was Maudsley's Halloween, which equally went down because the Coast Guard didn't see the flares. And Victor Emmanuel was more and more unlucky because the lifeboats were stoved in against the side of the ship, and only 4 people survived. Rather more survived Halloween, not all of them though. And this ship's bell is preserved on the Isle of Wight as a memorial of what happened. Sad lives. And they also built, this was a War Office contract, and the War Office were giving all the shipbuilders these contracts. In fact, some of the trouble which Joyce got into before the bankruptcy was about being ordered to change some of the steamships he was building into troop ships without being funded, of course, by the Department of War. So they built Flirt and Fidget, small, cheerful class gunboats, and they were wooden vessels with screw propulsion. And there were lots of them, but these were the ones that Joyce built. Didn't last long. Now, this, is almost the final one of the big ships which Joyce built. I don't really believe this picture, but I found it, and it's a nice picture, so you can sit and look. They were intended for the Spanish railway company to run between Trocadero and Cadiz. Now, when I look at the map, of course, Trocadero is virtually in Cadiz. And what this is, what the boats were for, was to do a 15-minute run across the channel to take people from the railway station Trocadero into Cadiz. Now, I don't believe for 1 minute anyone in their right mind would build a ship of that size to take people on little 15-minute trips across the bay. So I think it's the wrong picture, but it claimed it was the right one. So who am I to criticize people from the shipping fraternity? Okay, well, now we come to the really bad bit. 22nd of August, 1856, William died very suddenly, 42 years old, sudden hemorrhage, and he was gone one morning early. And it said, he's one who has done much to promote the prosperity of the working classes in this neighborhood. His character stood high, and his loss will be severely felt. Which is bad. And I said, I mean, you know, he wasn't very old, and he's, died, you know. And here's the funeral at Nunhead Cemetery, where else? And as seems to be typical with these industrialists who died, the workforce of the firm followed the funeral cortege. It's a long way, actually, from Greenwich to Nunhead. I mean, I wouldn't want to walk it particularly. Men and lads walking two and two in the employ of the firm and numbering in all nearly 200. Now, there's a couple of strange things about this. One is there's no Louisa at the funeral. But two, the clergy concerned are Reverend Dr. North and Reverend Miss Norris. Now, they're not dissenting ministers. They're two Roman Catholic priests from Our Lady's Star of the Sea, which will have been, you know, a few yards actually from where Joyce was living in Diamond Terrace. But I do understand that Joyce is buried in the dissenters section, where the undergrowth is so deep and strong that nobody's prepared to go in and find his grave for me, which I don't entirely blame them for. I've tried with Livesey graves. The undergrowth at Nunhead is quite something. Also, of course, at the funeral is Charles Joyce, Frederick Westmoreland, who's Charles Joyce's son-in-law, and the two employees, the two chief employees, who are going to take the foundry over, Mr. Meacham and Mr. Delaney. Now, I threw in for sort of good luck the Martyrs Memorial at Nunhead, which is just off the main drag as you turn right. And there's this memorial, and it's to the Scottish martyrs, who were a group of dissenters. There's been quite a bit written about them. Most famous source of information I know of is Thompson's History of the English Working Classes, although they're Scottish, never mind. Some of them were deported, and supporters of theirs had this memorial put up at Nunhead. I don't know, obviously, if the Joyce family knew about that, because some of the accusations made about Joyce when he was put in the Tower was about his support for the Scottish martyrs. Right. So Joyce is dead and everything continues under Thomas Meacham. Thomas also didn't live very long. He came from Stourport, lived in Circus Street. And somewhere at the bottom here, I found a little note that they are already into building lighthouses of St. Ives. But the first big ship they built, which must have been a hangover from Joyce, was the Metropolis, another big showy launch. They rather specialized at Joyce in these big launches with every sort of posh person available there. Metropolis, I think, was launched by Miss Airy, who of course is the daughter of the Astronomer Royal. And the other previous ships had all been launched by young ladies who were the daughters of various important citizens, quite a number of them from the Royal Dockyard communities. So if you ran out of posh people's daughters, they really would have been in trouble. And she was on the Channel Islands route, was Metropolis. Seems to have done very well. I don't know anything about her, but her future, but she seemed to be afloat and doing what she was supposed to do. And the works continues. It's technically bought up by the Victoria Foundry Company, which is just a company name for a company which had been set up by Meacham. And we've got all sorts of in here, the Victoria Company, to particular attention to the pendulous engine, improved flour mills manufactured by them. And the pendulous engine on a high pressure principle consumes only about 3 pounds of something I can't read. The engines are manufactured here, and the high, generally they're pushing in this advert, which is a plug to say they've changed the name of the business, to push the pendulous engine as their big seller. And here we are again, where they're saying it's for sale, that the business is for sale, but nobody ever seems to buy it. So what they do build in the intervening period is this thing, the connector, which I'm afraid at the time, and possibly now, most of the people writing about it see it as a bit of a joke. You can see these are very fanciful pictures because, I mean, they never saw the thing on high seas where it's going up and down like this. Here we are, the better picture of her. She comes to bits in sections, so that she got to Hartlepool from London, all right, and then filled up with coal on the various sections. The idea is she goes back to London, and she did, and she stops at the first customer, and they disconnect the boat, and they leave a chunk of boat at the wharf, put the boat back together again, and off they go. It's a sort of principle you have with railway wagons, and on the way it sounds a bit sensible. If I can think of various inconveniences with it, but still. But as I said, the contemporary reports are just full of derision for it. And I'm sure, I mean, I know that these drawings are fanciful, and that it did complete a couple of voyages at least, reasonably successful. But clearly they're right in that a very rough sea would get them into a lot of trouble. Now, this, I'm afraid, is the last thing that I know of which remains, which Joyce's foundry actually built. And over the years, I've had a number of people send me photographs of the plaque on this lighthouse, saying that it was built in Greenwich, designed and specified and directed by Alexander Gordon, civil engineer. He's not an employee at all of the foundry. Gordon is quite an upmarket consultant, specializing in lighthouses, among other things. His father is David Gordon, who's the chap who was inventing various bits of steam car machinery. And DeVille down here, who is a lighting specialist, who ends up, of course, taking a big interest in the X-Pens works. So this is outside of Cape Town, cast iron section set from Greenwich, and taken to Buffles Bay, and then uphill on a gun carriage, and that it was in use as a lighthouse from 1876 until 1915, and now it's a tourist attraction. And as you can see, it looks very nice. It's painted up, and I'm told by people who've been there that it's very interesting. It is the last thing I know about which was made at the Victoria Foundry. Thomas Delaney. Thomas Meacham died in 1867, and the foundry devolved to Joseph Delaney, and he had served apprenticeship under Joyce and was their naval architect and manager, assisted by one Charles Raymond Oakes. Now, Oakes is the one person involved in all this who's actually done an apprenticeship somewhere else, in that he had done an apprenticeship under Fairbairns. This is all quite upmarket, you know. I mean, they're still recruiting people who are actually good and been involved with important companies. Nearly finished, I'm afraid. Under Delaney, I know that they built a number of engines for various yachts. This is Wolverine for Lieutenant Colonel Brandram. the chemical company owner, and this steamer Lady Byrne, who flounders with 400 capital on board. But you get a feeling it's barely ticking over. I don't know of any ships being built. And I mean, this is all fairly minor stuff compared with what they were doing earlier. 1866, the foundry closed during the commercial crisis. Now, very quickly, and I mean, the codicil to all this is Delaney, who was left as the manager of a company that doesn't exist any longer. And it turns out, and I've always said, haven't I, they're all very upmarket people. He's married to the daughter of the chief cashier of the Bank of England. So he's quite easily gets a job as a bank manager in Blackheath, which he hates, really hates it. And eventually his wife dies. And he goes off to sea, signs up as an engineer on a Chilean steamship. Having got to Chile, I don't know if he gets off the boat, presumably people know him, I don't know. And he's appointed as chief constructor of the Chilean Navy. Now, this is a remarkably upmarket job, but clearly something he wanted to do. And he died in Chile eventually. And that, I'm afraid, is the end of Joyce Foundry. And it's the end of Joyce as a shipbuilding company. I think they managed to build some quite interesting ships. And had Joyce lived, and had they managed to found the shipping line, I think things would be very different. But they are dogged with a lot of bad luck from the cricket blowing up. This long and very boring legal case. So thank you, and that's it. I think.
Thank you, Mary. That was good. Interesting. Yeah. Is there anything left on the site of
No, everything. There might have been stuff on Dreadnought, but I mean, you know, the developers went in and cleared everything in sight. The I said the foundry site is Council Estate, would have been cleared in the 30s by the GLC. Trying to get back.
That segmented ship that's going up to the North Sea looks bloody scary. Yeah. Although, I mean, that I was interested in your caption saying it could have been used in canals, so something similar was.
Yes, that's right. That's right. But it was just been met with derision. And people I've spoken to since when there was this joke ship, you know.
Yeah.
It clearly wasn't.
I mean, it's one of the roughest seas in the world, so you wouldn't really want to have something like that on.
No.
But I mean, there were, there was the Tom Puddings on the air and Calder navigation and stuff like that. So the idea of having ships in sections, even sailboats in sections, was not new. Any questions? Can you type them in or?
Just trying to get back to my main screen. I'm failing.
Just go on share screen. Go to the green button in the middle bottom and just click on it so you don't share it anymore. Mouse down to the middle bottom.
Want to go. More. No, I can't get the big screen up. I don't. Oh well.
But any questions? Any comments? Any observations?
I'm not big.
Myrna.
I have a question.
Go on, Joe.
Did I
your phone so you can see more than just your glasses?
Is that better?
No. You need to point it at yourself. Yeah, that's
Hang
better.
on.
Yeah.
Hang on. Right.
Yeah.
Did I hear totally wrongly? Did you say he was in the Tower of London at some time?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that? I mean, I know it's a slight irrelevance, but I was fascinated. How did he end up in the Tower of London?
You need to read John's book, which gives a lot of detail about it. I don't know if he's still with us here, but he will know more than I do. Yes, I mean, I think they would still put traitors in the tower, given half a chance. I mean, it's still, I think, legally a prison.
Joyce was charged with, is one of the famous 12 charged in the treason trials of 1794. He spent nearly 5 months between Newgate and Tower. Eventually, just before the end of 1794, they were released after the charges against Thomas Horne Tooke were defeated in a very famous case. Yeah, and the charges were dropped as a result, because charges against Tooke were defeated, so therefore all the others that were arraigned on the same charges were released. But he was then under the employ of Stanhope, which is the Stanhope connection. He was working for Stanhope from 1790 to 1800, and his first son Charles was born in 1798, and in Chevening, which is Stanhope's house down there in Kent, on the borders of Kent there. So I'm very interested in the sources of funding, and one of them might have come from Stanhope, who was very much involved in trying to build ships and things like that. But also Joyce, in his latter years, lived in a house in Highgate,
where William was born. Yeah,
but the houses were owned by the Francis Burdett Coutts family, which were hugely wealthy, and I suspect some of the dosh might have come that way.
Burdett, of course, was in with the various left wingers like Stanhope.
Yeah, that's right. So there's a major set of connections going on there. But Joyce himself was, you said, from a humble origins, and he was. And there was a great deal of embarrassment that surrounded him. In fact, he was embarrassed about his connections in his pro-French Revolution connections, as many people were, because after when the French Revolution happened, lots of English intellectuals were very pro that. But as we went to war, it was both dangerous and not very patriotic to be seen to be in support of that. So they buried their connections, and Joyce was heavily tied up with that. So it became a great embarrassment to a lot of people. And that's just one of the reasons he had all his papers burnt. And in the Stanhope papers, when Stanhope died, Lord North went through them and got rid of anything political, including any mention of Joyce. Precisely because of the embarrassment that surrounded Joyce altogether. So there are lots of reasons to stay away. So the trail goes very cold because those are the records, and of course, generally speaking, any kind of records with any kind of radical connotation could end you could end up in the King's Bench anyway. So it was lots of reasons not to keep records about it. Yeah, that was those sorts of leads. But the fairy connection is also interesting, because in lots of those textbooks and the Rees's Cyclopedia, lots of the illustrations were done by fairy.
No, I was really pleased to find that, and it was only because the kind people at Kent Archives sent me the transcript of the leaflet they've got. That I picked up the address, Have you heard anything about the Martyrs' Memorial in Nunhead?
Well, Joyce was a supporter of the Scottish Martyrs and kept in contact and wrote letters to Palmer, who was one of the many that were transported in 1793. And that was again a radical connection, but he did that as a matter of all the things that went on in the transportation that were on that. So there was a fairly strong connection, because everyone felt very violated by the way in which the martyrs were treated. They were sort of treated as an example, or made an example of, and only one of them ever got back. And that was a long and tortuous story. So there was clearly a connection with that, and they stayed on the hulks in 1793. That just before they went on the hulks for quite a way in the Thames. So there was a connection with Joyce there.
Thanks.
Thank you.
No worries.
Right. Any more? You mentioned Smyrna, Mary. Is Smyrna now?
Mentioned what?
Smyrna. You said they sold the company sold something to Smyrna, and you've been trying to find it. Is that the place that's now called Izmir on the Turkish coast?
I can't hear you, or I'm not sure what you mean.
Okay, don't worry.
I'm sorry, my hearing's so dodgy.
Right.
I mean,
Any more questions?
Greenwich was sold itself with Joyce, but they were so pleased that he was in proper Greenwich, and all the people, like the really important shipbuilders like Langley, who were just up the road in Deptford, they could pretend they didn't exist, and that Joyce was the real shipbuilder in real Greenwich, and not in nasty Woolwich or Deptford. And I think he lived on that reputation for a while.
Good. Thank you.
Could I just ask a little bit more about the family backgrounds? Because Joyce is usually an Irish surname.
Yeah.
And he appointed, or rather Meacham is often an Irish surname, Delaney an Irish surname, and it might explain the Catholic connection. Do we know when they came to England?
I agree, but I had thought about that with the two Catholic priests he was clearly very friendly with. But I still can't explain why they were at his funeral and not a dissenting minister. Any thoughts, John?
Sorry, I'd muted myself.
It's about an Irish background because Joyce is.
Yeah. I explored that. I mean, I assumed it was as well because there was a sort of a printer who did quite a lot of work on Joyce's books. But I couldn't. I mean, the Joyce family they were they were woolcombers from Cheshunt, and they'd been there for several years. They were connected to the dissenting ministers. But there is no obvious Irish connection that I could find. I did try. I mean, Joyce married the daughter of Fagg, the famous guy who rescued Gibraltar, the siege of Gibraltar. So there was a seagoing connection in the family. There's no record of any Irish connection as far as I can see, either in the Fagg side or the or in the Joyce side. Certainly not for 3 generations before Jeremiah was born. But I know that was an obvious link. I would have assumed is there, but it wasn't.
I mean, with the two Catholic clergy, I mean, I feel a bit, okay, why? But the church is just up the road from them. And it was quite an ambitious church. I mean, it still is, if you like. And I've been talking about it quite a bit to, oh God, what's his name? He's given talk, the priest there who's given talk
Kevin.
about railways.
Kevin.
Yeah, sure. And it feels that they were quite ambitious about the building and that he may have just been interested in the act, and because they were nearby neighbours and so on. But otherwise, it does seem odd.
But there is a sense in which, as well, the Catholics were very different from sort of the Unitarian tradition, which Joyce stands in. But there was quite a sort of comrade in arms in the sense they weren't the Church of England. You know, in
Was
some
it
places
gonna be? Yes.
it was, almost illegal to be Catholic, and there are lots of things you couldn't do if you were a Catholic. And as lots of people would attest, so there was a kind of albeit that theologically, in terms of liturgy and all those other sort of conceptions of God, etc., were on very different pages, but they had similar sort of, they're being not being accepted by the establishment. So there is a kind of a connection there.
Yes. And confusingly, there was a Church of England priest called North at the same time as the building of Our Lady's
Yes, ma'am.
Sea.
But I'm pretty sure that is the Catholic chap. And Norris is his assistant. I mean, again, I'm sorry about that. I've forgotten the name of the bloke that is the priest up there, but he's very, very helpful. Not here, is he? No.
He's Father Kevin, and yes, we'll be
Yeah.
having a word with him.
Do you know whether about the further Stanhope connections? I mean, Stanhope was an inventor who was doing these crazy things. He tried to invent as well the boat with two bows. The idea that you can go in and in and out of a dock now, reverse, straight in. It never worked. It was nonsensical. But he was clearly involved in boat building and on the Thames, and there's records of him going to Greenwich. Did those connections? Did that?
I didn't pick anything up like that at all. I didn't pick anything about Stanhope at all. But you see, I've got no personal information about William at all, really, beyond, sort of official documents. So I don't know. But it'd be nice if had a visit or something. But I agree, and I've thought about Stanhope as a sort of funding. I mean, I also think they must have felt, all of them, this young boy who'd never known his father and all the rest of it, that they've got to give him some support,
Stanhope was also involved in sort of early applications of steam, very early applications of steam, which were almost universally unsuccessful.
But William wouldn't have known about any of that.
No, but the historical traditions would have been there.
Yeah.
I don't know whether there was a sort of line of lineal funding or mutual agreement.
I mean, I don't see how Cheveney would affect Greenwich, really. It's quite a way away. It's quite a remote little village, really. Apart maybe the Foreign Secretary's house. I mean, that whole area, I think, has been, where Cheveney is, very much developed as a sort of military complex, if you like, over the past 200 years. And I mean, just starting quite soon after.
Stanhope, he was sort of known as an inventor. He was always trying.
Yes, he was, wasn't he? Yeah.
The Stanhope press, quite a lot in terms of trying to develop methods of tar to improve houses. And these records about him involved in the application of steam in developing ships in Greenwich. But that's just sort of very, very thin connections that I don't know much about him at all. Really.
I would assume about anybody from his background who was looking at shipping would look at the Royal Dockyards rather than private shipping companies. I mean, that's quite easy to research because the dockyards, there's piles of people researching them and quite a lot of. I could run it past the NMM, see if they've got anything. They might do.
Thank you.
No, I'm doing this research.
I just check to see whether it is working. I just wanted to check to see whether my microphone's working. It is working. Thank you.
I can't hear. I'm sorry.
I couldn't hear a word of that, but yeah.
I was hoping to whether you could hear me. Can you just? I
Just
want to check
very,
whether my
not
mic.
not very well.
No. Okay. Thank you.
I was just looking at the chat to see if there's any there we ought to react to. West Greenwich, I noticed. Oh, David Ramsden, now come on. It's not West Greenwich particularly.
Right, shall we?
I'm just still looking. I can't wind it up.
Yeah. Okay. Do you want to say talk about the next talk, Mary?
It's Mark James, isn't it, doing trams and I hope tram depots. Greenwich was a bit of a Charlton, really, more than Greenwich. Had a lot of LCC, had the LCC repair depot and the tramatorium where they were all blown up, and the last tram, 2 or 3 last trams. There wasn't a last tram. There was a whole series of last trams. One of them driven by the Woolwich mayor, and also a number of private companies which were sort of leaking out from Bexley Heath area. I don't know what Mark's going to cover. I've got to go through it with him. But we've also changed the date to a week later than it was originally advertised. But that's the next one. And after that, we've got John Forward, who used to be the second in charge at the Plumstead Museum, who works in Kingston, looking at links. I tried to, I shouldn't say this, to get him to talk about the Glenton Railway, the other railway in Greenwich, but he didn't want to do it.
Right.
Okay, off you go.
So, thank you. So keep an eye on our Facebook group, and at some point, probably early next year, we're planning a new website which will have much better at telling everyone what's going on. We will obviously keep the Facebook group, but we'll have a sort of center for everything on a new website. And I've been talking to designers on that.
I've spent all day checking. I do this weekly article for Weekender, and I had a nice article already written. And then I get this email in the middle of the night telling me that the rotunda is falling down. So I spent most of today writing an article about the rotunda to go in to take the place of the one I'd done, because I feel the rotunda is an important issue. And it's the most eccentric building you could possibly begin to have. And it shouldn't be allowed to let the army just let it fall down, which they will do just like that, given half a chance. Okay.
Yeah. So watch out for that on the rotunda. Thank you, Mary. Thanks for a good talk. And
Thank you, Mary.
Next month. Thank you very much.
Look at the planning application, Philip.
Yes, I will. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.